In 1939, the Pennsylvania Railroad unveiled $3 million worth of engineering marvel, a steam locomotive so advanced its creators called it the perfect Streamliner. In just 15 years, it disappeared, leaving behind confusion and embarrassment. How did a machine built to dominate American railroads become the Pennsylvania Railroad's most spectacular and costly failure? The answer reshaped the future of passenger travel, and its consequences still echo today. Here is how ambition, rivalry, and innovation collided to create a legend that vanished before its time. By the late 1930s, American railroads were locked in a contest that stretched from coast to coast. Speed records fell almost as quickly as they were set. Each railroad sought not just to move passengers, but to capture the public imagination and the lucrative business that came with it. The Pennsylvania Railroad, already the largest rail system in the world by mileage and electrification, saw its rivals investing in sleek new trains and diesel engines. The 20th Century Limited was the New York Central's showpiece. Union Pacific and Burlington were fielding lightweight diesels and claiming dazzling times across the plains. Even as the Great Depression lingered, the railroad industry poured millions into high-speed luxury, convinced that prestige and technical prowess would secure their futures. For the Pennsylvania Railroad Board, this was more than a matter of reputation. The company's reputation rested on being first in both power and innovation. Market share was at stake as highways and airlines began to lure away travelers. Railroads that could offer the fastest, most comfortable service on their flagship routes would dominate the lucrative New York to Chicago corridor. Mileage bragging rights became a public spectacle, with newspapers breathlessly reporting every new schedule and every record run. In this environment, incremental improvements were not enough. The Pennsylvania Railroad leadership believed that only a technological leap could restore their edge. The board's response was to authorize a project on a scale the industry had never seen, a locomotive that would outclass anything on steel rails. They set their sights on a machine capable of hauling the heaviest passenger trains at sustained speeds over 100 miles per hour. The vision called for a prototype so advanced, so powerful, that it would leave competitors scrambling to catch up. The budget reflected this ambition, nearly $670,000 in shop costs, with additional millions spent on design, special tooling, and a dramatic public unveiling. Adjusted for inflation, this was a sum more commonly reserved for entire fleets, not a single experimental engine. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Pennsylvania Railroad could field a locomotive that combined speed, power, and style, it would not only reclaim the title of America's premier railroad, but also set a new standard for the industry. The S1 was conceived as the answer, a machine that would embody the future of rail travel, both in performance and in appearance. The company's engineers, designers, and executives poured their resources into the project, determined to produce a locomotive that would turn heads and win headlines. As the S1 neared completion, anticipation built across the industry. The Pennsylvania Railroad's gamble was about to be put on display before the world. In a decade defined by rivalry and rapid change, the S1 represented not just a technical achievement, but a declaration of intent. The Pennsylvania Railroad was betting everything on one spectacular showpiece, convinced that this was the path to lasting supremacy in the golden age of American railroading. On a spring day in 1939, the Pennsylvania Railroad's answer to the future stood gleaming at the heart of the New York World's Fair. The S1, stretching an astonishing 140 feet from coupler to coupler, dominated the American Railroad's pavilion. Its presence was impossible to ignore, a streamlined shell of polished steel and flowing curves, the product of industrial designer Raymond Loewy, who had already left his mark on everything from refrigerators to locomotives. Loewy's Art Deco vision gave the S1 a look that seemed to belong to another era, one just around the corner. Visitors crowded the exhibition hall, drawn by headlines that called the S1 the locomotive of tomorrow. The press marveled at its size and power, but it was the spectacle that captured imaginations. Instead of sitting idle, the S1 was mounted on a special roller stand. Every day, engineers fired its massive boiler, bringing the locomotive to life for the crowd. The great drive wheels spun at speeds that simulated a full-throttle dash across the Midwest, their motion visible behind the sweeping skirting. Steam hissed, rods blurred, and the scent of hot oil filled the air. For many, it was the first time they had seen a machine of such scale and grace move with apparent effortlessness, yet never leave its place. The S1's debut was more than a technical demonstration, it was a performance. Loewy's streamlining was not just for show. Every line, every polished surface reflected the optimism of an age that believed in progress through engineering. Photographers snapped images for national magazines. Children pressed against the railing, watching the rods and wheels turn. Railroad executives mingled with the public, pointing out the locomotive's record-breaking proportions and hinting at the speeds it would soon achieve in service. The World's Fair drew nearly 25 million visitors over 2 seasons, and the S1's daily runs on the rollers alone racked up its first 50,000 miles, without ever touching a main line. The S1 became a symbol, gracing calendars, posters, and PRR brochures. Its image promised a world where travel would be faster, smoother, and more glamorous than ever before. A rail historian later described the scene. It was as much theater as technology. The S1 did not just look fast, it looked inevitable. Yet even as the crowds marveled and the press declared a new era, the S1's story was only beginning. Behind the dazzling exterior, engineers were preparing for the real test, translating spectacle into service. For now, though, the mood was pure celebration, an era's hopes embodied in steel and steam, turning endlessly under the bright lights of the World's Fair. Beneath the flowing Art Deco shell, the S1 was unlike any locomotive the Pennsylvania Railroad or the world had ever attempted. The heart of the machine was its duplex drive, a mechanical concept that split the engine's power between 2 sets of driving wheels, each with its own pair of cylinders. Instead of the traditional single set of 8 drivers, the S1's 6-4-4-6 arrangement meant 4 massive cylinders, 2 up front and 2 behind, each delivering power to independent sets of 84-inch wheels. The goal was clear: deliver more horsepower at higher speeds while reducing the pounding stresses that plagued conventional steam giants. A mechanical engineer looking at the S1's cutaway would point to the sheer scale of its moving parts. Each cylinder measured 22 inches across, with a 26-inch stroke, feeding steam in carefully timed bursts. The duplex arrangement was supposed to smooth out the flow of power, like 2 athletes pushing a sled in perfect synchrony. In theory, this would minimize the hammer blow on the rails and allow the locomotive to maintain 100 miles per hour with a 1,200-ton train, something no other steam engine could claim at the time. But the S1's ambitions went beyond brute force. To keep those 4 cylinders and their rods running smoothly at high speed, the locomotive relied on an intricate lubrication network. More than 350 grease fittings lined the running gear, each one needing daily attention. Roller bearings, still a rarity in the 1930s, reduced friction on the axles and rods, allowing the S1 to run cooler and faster than its predecessors. This was engineering at the edge. Every piston stroke, every valve event had to be perfectly timed to prevent uneven torque and dangerous vibration at speed. The S1's rigid frame stretched more than 80 feet, longer than many city buses. Unlike articulated locomotives which hinged to follow curves, the S1's wheelbase was fixed, This was a deliberate choice meant to ensure stability at triple-digit speeds. The six-wheel leading and trailing trucks, each weighing over 130,000 pounds, carried much of the locomotive's mass. Only about 47% of the total weight rested on the drivers, an unusual distribution that would later have profound consequences. On paper, the S1's numbers were staggering. 6,500 indicated horsepower at 100 miles per hour, 76,400 pounds of tractive effort, and a steam consumption rate that pushed the limits of even the largest fireboxes. The duplex drive, with its alternating torque pulses, was supposed to keep the wheels spinning smoothly under immense loads. Designers believed that by splitting the work, each set of drivers could grip the rails more effectively, reducing the risk of slip and wear. Yet the complexity that made the S1 so advanced also made it demanding. Keeping the cylinders in perfect tune required constant adjustment. The lubrication system, though innovative, forced crews to spend hours crawling under the skirting, greasing every joint and bearing. The rigid frame, while stable at speed, offered little forgiveness on curves or uneven track. For the engineers who built and maintained it, the S1 represented both the pinnacle of steam-era ambition and a daily technical challenge. Its duplex drive was a marvel of mechanical theory, promising a new era of high-speed rail. But as the locomotive left the controlled environment of the shop and the World's Fair, the true test would be whether this tangle of rods, cylinders, and grease fittings could survive the realities of American track. Test runs on the Chicago to Crestline main line began with anticipation, but the S1's immense 81-foot rigid frame quickly revealed the limits of theory. Turning the locomotive was a logistical challenge. Standard turntables, most under 100 feet, fell short of the S1's 140-foot length. At Crestline, crews extended a roundhouse stall and used special Y-tracks just to reverse direction. Even so, derailments happened during slow moves, the frame resisting every tight curve. The S1's sheer size made it a spectacle, but also a problem. The duplex drive, celebrated on paper, proved unpredictable in the field. On a December 1940 run from Chicago to Crestline, the S1 pulled 24 lightweight coaches, the speedometer pushing past 100 miles per hour. But when engineers applied power or hit slick rails, the 8 84-inch drivers struggled for grip. Only 47% of the S1's 608,000 pounds of weight pressed on the drivers, the rest bearing down on the six-wheel leading and trailing trucks. This imbalance meant that, despite a theoretical tractive effort of 76,400 pounds, the locomotive slipped easily, sometimes at startup and more often at speed. Engineers described throttle control as a balancing act. Too much, and one set of drivers spun. Too little, and the S1's power was wasted. The duplex arrangement added complexity. 2 sets of cylinders powered separate driver groups, so slip could start in the front or rear engine, often without warning. Detecting which set was losing traction required a practiced ear and a sharp eye on the rods. When slip went unnoticed, damage followed, with bent rods, battered bearings, and urgent repairs. Shop logs from Crestline and Altoona show a steady stream of fixes tied to these episodes. The longer the S1 ran, the more its power revealed hidden costs. Maintenance became a daily ritual. The S1 had over 350 grease fittings, each needing attention before every run. Early on, crews removed sections of the streamlined skirting, Raymond Loewy's Art Deco signature, just to reach these points. Mechanics spent hours beneath the engine, wiping away dust and oil and checking for wear. The lubrication system, meant to keep the running gear cool at speed, demanded constant vigilance. Miss a fitting, and the risk of a seized bearing or failed rod rose sharply. Maintenance was relentless. Physical constraints shaped every mile. The rigid wheelbase amplified hunting on curves, and just over 2 inches of lateral play in the trucks was not enough for the Pennsylvania Railroad's winding routes. The S1 could only run on the straightest main lines. Yards and branches were off limits. Even on its assigned route, engineers treated the throttle with respect, knowing a moment's lapse could send the drivers spinning or the frame lurching off the rails. Constraints defined where the locomotive could go. Test logs and crew accounts from the early 1940s reveal a locomotive both awe-inspiring and brittle. The S1 could outpace any rival when conditions were perfect, but every mile exposed new vulnerabilities. For the shop crews at Crestline and Altoona, the S1 was part marvel, part daily headache, a bold experiment whose flaws became impossible to ignore. Fueling the S1 for a run across the Fort Wayne division meant filling its tender with 53,000 pounds of coal and more than 24,000 gallons of water. Shop ledgers from Crestline and Altoona revealed just how quickly those reserves vanished. On a typical 283-mile trip, the S1 burned through coal at a rate far above what PRR's K4 Pacifics required, with firemen reporting the need for extra scoops just to keep up with the locomotive's appetite. The massive steam output, more than 17,000 cubic feet per minute at top speed, translated into a steady drain on both fuel and water, especially when wheel slip wasted energy with every surge of the throttle. The cost of keeping the S1 in motion did not end at the coal pile. Maintenance records show a relentless schedule of inspections and repairs. Each day began with mechanics crawling beneath the frame to tend to more than 350 grease fittings, a process so time-consuming that crews soon removed sections of the streamlined skirting for easier access. Even with this, the duplex drive's complexity meant frequent adjustments to the rods and valve gear, especially after episodes of high-speed slip left components battered or bent. Wheel slip not only wasted fuel, it forced repeated shop visits to replace worn parts and realign the running gear. Availability suffered as a result. While the S1 averaged impressive monthly mileage during its prime, it spent an outsized portion of its life in the shop. Specialized facilities at Crestline were built just to handle its size and needs, but even these could not keep pace with the demands. Compared to PRR's standard steam fleet, the S1's maintenance and fuel bills soared, straining the budget for a locomotive that could only earn revenue on a single main line. For the engineers and shop crews tasked with keeping it running, the S1 was both a marvel and a daily burden. A machine whose promise was undercut by the realities of its upkeep. By the end of World War II, the S1's fate was sealed in quiet meetings far from the main line. Pennsylvania Railroad Board minutes from early 1946 record the locomotive's withdrawal from regular service. The decision was not driven by a single catastrophic failure, but by a steady accumulation of evidence. The S1 cost too much to run, required constant attention, and could not adapt to the network's demands. For nearly 5 years, it had hauled the heaviest trains between Chicago and Crestline, racking up respectable mileage on its narrow assignment. Yet every month, the bills for coal, water, and specialized maintenance outpaced any revenue it could earn. Shop reports from Crestline and Altoona documented the relentless cycle of repairs, rods bent by wheel slip, bearings worn by high-speed stress, hundreds of grease fittings demanding daily care. As diesels proved their worth across the system, the S1 was quietly sidelined. No public announcement marked the end. The locomotive lingered in storage, too large for most tracks, too expensive to justify a comeback. Disposal records from Altoona show that in 1949, after a decade of service and 3 years in limbo, the S1 was scrapped. Not a single piece was preserved. Unlike other icons of the steam era, the S1 left no relics, no museum display. The Pennsylvania Railroad, stung by the memory of its costly experiment, erased the locomotive from its future plans. In the space of 15 years, the locomotive of tomorrow had vanished, first from the rails, then from the company's collective memory. The S1's story closed not with a crash, but with a verdict. Some ambitions, no matter how grand, cannot survive the weight of their own design. Innovation still tempts us to chase perfection, often at staggering risk. Today, as industries pour billions into bold promises, the S1's fate warns that solving yesterday's problems can cost tomorrow's future. Progress demands vision, but survival means seeing beyond the allure of legacy. In a world obsessed with breakthroughs, the real challenge is knowing when to let go. What do you think? Are we repeating the S1's mistake?